While my son David and his wife Karen were frantically scrambling to pack their belongings and explain to her parents why they all had to vacate the 3-bedroom apartment by the end of the week, staring in disbelief at the eviction notice that had just been served by the sheriff's department, I was standing in the doorway holding the property deed and rental management contract that had just made me their new landlord, finally understanding that sometimes the family members who throw a 70-year-old woman out on the street to make room for their in-laws are about to discover they just evicted someone with 35 years of commercial real estate investment experience and a network of property acquisition contacts they never knew existed. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been kicked out or mistreated by family members who thought you had nowhere else to go, only to discover you had more resources and connections than they ever imagined? Share your story below, because today, you're going to learn that sometimes the people who treat you like a burden they need to get rid of are about to receive the most expensive lesson in respect and consequences they'll ever get. This story is about the cold February morning when I realized that my own son David, the child I'd raised as a single mother after his father walked out when David was 12, put through college with money I'd saved working double shifts as a commercial property manager, supported through his early marriage when he couldn't afford his own place, and welcomed into my carefully maintained apartment when he and Karen needed somewhere affordable to live while they saved for their first home, had been systematically planning to force me out of my own living space while assuming I was too old, too financially vulnerable, and too emotionally dependent on his approval to find alternative housing or protect myself against his calculated manipulation. When I discovered that the son I'd sacrificed everything for, taught everything I knew about budgeting and property management during countless evenings, helping him understand rental agreements and tenant rights, and trusted with access to my most private living space during what I'd believed were temporary family arrangements, had been quietly coordinating with his wife's parents about moving them into my apartment, while pressuring me to find somewhere else to live so they could have more space and privacy for their expanding family needs without any regard for my financial situation or housing options. My name is Eleanor Ruth Martinez, and at 70 years old, I thought I'd found the perfect solution for helping my struggling adult child while maintaining family relationships by allowing David and Karen to live in my spacious 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Phoenix at significantly below market rent. An arrangement that had seemed like a win-win situation that would help them save money for their future while providing me with family companionship and assistance with household tasks as I navigated the challenges of aging in place. But what happened next would teach David and Karen a lesson about respect, assumptions, and the dangerous consequences of underestimating someone who had spent 3.5 decades building expertise and connections in the commercial real estate industry. What they thought was just their aging mother who was lucky to have such a nice apartment would turn out to be someone with the knowledge, resources, and determination to completely reverse the power dynamic in ways they never saw coming. Downtown Phoenix apartment that had been my home for 8 years was located in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods, the historic Roosevelt Row district, just 3 blocks from the light rail station and within walking distance of the arts district, medical facilities, and shopping that had made it perfect for an active senior who wanted to maintain independence while having access to urban amenities and public transportation that reduced the need for driving as vision and reflexes changed with age. Roosevelt Row had undergone dramatic transformation during my time there, evolving from a somewhat neglected downtown area into Phoenix's most vibrant cultural and residential district. When I'd first moved to the neighborhood in 2016, many of the surrounding buildings had been vacant or underutilized, but my experience in commercial property management had helped me recognize the early signs of gentrification and urban renewal that would make the area increasingly valuable and desirable for both residents and investors. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Empty lots had been converted into pocket parks with public art installations. Abandoned warehouses had been renovated into trendy restaurants, craft breweries, and artisan workshops. Historic buildings had been restored and converted into mixed-use developments, featuring ground-floor retail with residential units above. The entire neighborhood had developed the kind of walkable, culturally rich atmosphere that urban planners dreamed about, and that had made Roosevelt Row a model for successful downtown revitalization projects throughout the Southwest. My apartment building itself was a perfect example of the area's successful adaptive reuse projects. The structure had originally been built in 1925 as the Phoenix Textile Manufacturing Warehouse, a 4-story brick building with industrial architecture that had employed hundreds of workers during the city's early manufacturing boom. After the textile industry moved overseas in the 1970s, the building had sat vacant for nearly 30 years, slowly deteriorating until a visionary developer had purchased it in 2014 and invested $2 million in a complete renovation and conversion project. The renovation had preserved the building's industrial character while adding modern amenities and sustainable features that made it attractive to contemporary urban dwellers. The original, exposed brick walls, steel beam construction, and large factory windows had been restored and highlighted as design features. The concrete floors had been polished and fitted with radiant heating systems. Modern HVAC, electrical, and plumbing systems had been installed throughout. Energy-efficient appliances, LED lighting, and smart home technology had been integrated seamlessly with the historic architecture. The result was a stunning example of adaptive reuse that honored the building's industrial heritage while providing luxury living spaces that appealed to young professionals, empty nesters, and urban lifestyle enthusiasts who valued both character and convenience in their housing choices. The building had been featured in Architectural Digest and Phoenix magazine as one of the city's most successful historic preservation and residential development projects. My specific unit, 4C, was a corner apartment on the 4th floor with the most desirable exposure in the building. The southwest-facing windows provided panoramic views of the Phoenix skyline, South Mountain, and the spectacular Arizona sunsets that painted the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples every evening. The northeast-facing windows captured the morning light and offered views of Camelback Mountain and the affluent Scottsdale foothills that stretched toward the horizon. The apartment itself was 1,450 square feet of open-concept living space that had been designed with both style and functionality in mind. The main living area featured 18-foot ceilings with exposed ductwork painted in matte black, original, brick walls that provided texture and warmth, and polished concrete floors with embedded heating elements that kept the space comfortable during Phoenix's mild winter months while reducing cooling costs during the intense summer season. The kitchen had been designed with entertaining in mind, featuring a large island with seating for 4 quartz countertops that complemented the industrial aesthetic, stainless steel appliances, including a gas range that I'd specifically requested for serious cooking, and custom cabinetry that provided abundant storage while maintaining clean lines that didn't compete with the architectural details. The master bedroom was spacious and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that could be covered with automated blackout shades for sleeping or opened to flood the space with natural light during the day. The walk-in closet had been fitted with custom organizational systems, and the ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub positioned to capture mountain views, a separate glass-enclosed shower with multiple shower heads, and double vanities with vessel sinks that added a spa-like luxury to the daily routine. The second bedroom had been set up as my home office, with built-in shelving for my extensive collection of real estate and property management reference materials, a large desk positioned to take advantage of the morning light, and space for the filing cabinets where I maintained records of my various property investments and consulting projects that had continued to provide income throughout my retirement years. But perhaps the most valuable feature of the apartment was the private balcony, accessible through sliding doors from both the living room and master bedroom. The 200-square-foot outdoor space had been designed with urban gardening in mind, featuring built-in planters where I grew herbs and vegetables, comfortable seating areas where I could enjoy my morning coffee while watching the city wake up, and automated irrigation systems that kept everything thriving despite the challenging desert climate. The building's amenities had been another major factor in my decision to lease the apartment. The ground floor featured a fitness center with both cardio equipment and a yoga studio, where residents could participate in classes led by certified instructors. The rooftop had been developed as a community space with grilling areas, fire pits, comfortable seating arrangements, and unobstructed views of the surrounding mountains and city skyline that made it perfect for both solitary relaxation and social gatherings. The building also provided concierge services during business hours, secure package delivery systems that eliminated concerns about theft or missed deliveries, underground parking that protected vehicles from the intense Arizona sun and seasonal thunderstorms, and 24-hour security monitoring that provided peace of mind for residents who traveled frequently or simply valued the additional safety measures. Perhaps most importantly for someone my age, the building had attracted a diverse community of residents who looked out for each other and had developed genuine friendships that extended beyond casual neighborly interactions. The demographic mix included young professionals who worked in downtown Phoenix's growing technology and financial sectors, empty nesters who had downsized from suburban homes to embrace urban living, and creative professionals who were drawn to Roosevelt Ro's artistic culture and collaborative atmosphere. The building's management company, Desert Urban Properties, had been professional and responsive throughout my tenancy, maintaining the property to high standards while implementing regular improvements and updates that had kept the building competitive in Phoenix's rapidly evolving downtown rental market. They'd been particularly accommodating to my requests for aging-in-place modifications, allowing me to install additional grab bars, improved lighting, and smart home technology that enhanced both safety and convenience. My monthly rent of $2,100 had seemed reasonable when I'd first leased the apartment in 2016, particularly given the location, amenities, and the quality of the renovation. But as Roosevelt Row had gained recognition and popularity, comparable units in the building had seen dramatic rent increases, with similar apartments now commanding $3,200 to $3,800 per month, depending on the specific floor, exposure, and lease terms. The rental appreciation had been remarkable to witness from both a personal and professional perspective. My background in commercial property management had helped me understand the market forces driving the increases: limited inventory of high-quality urban housing, growing demand from young professionals who wanted to live close to downtown employment centers, and the cachet that Roosevelt Row had developed as Phoenix's premier cultural and entertainment district. This dramatic increase in rental values had made my decision to allow David and Karen to live with me at a significantly reduced rate particularly generous. When they'd moved in 18 months earlier, I'd charged them $800 per month to cover their portion of utilities and household expenses. But I hadn't increased their contribution, even as market rents had continued to rise. What had started as a modest discount had become a subsidy worth nearly $1,500 per month by the time our living arrangement had begun to deteriorate. David had graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in graphic design and had initially struggled to find steady employment that paid enough to cover Phoenix's rising housing costs. His student loan payments consumed nearly 30% of his take-home income, and the entry-level positions available in his field had offered salaries that made market-rate housing unaffordable, particularly in desirable neighborhoods with access to public transportation and cultural amenities. Karen worked as a dental assistant at a practice in Scottsdale, a position that provided steady employment and decent benefits, but required a significant commute from downtown Phoenix. Her income supplemented David's earnings enough to cover their basic living expenses, but saving money for a down payment on a home had been nearly impossible while paying full market rent in addition to their other financial obligations. When I'd first proposed the living arrangement in March 2022, both David and Karen had been enthusiastic about the opportunity to live in such a desirable location while building their savings for future home ownership. The arrangement had seemed to offer benefits for everyone involved. They would have access to luxury amenities and urban lifestyle at an affordable cost, while I would have family nearby and assistance with household tasks that were becoming more challenging as I aged. "Mom, this is such an incredibly generous offer," David had said when I'd first suggested they move in with me. "Having access to such an amazing apartment at that rent will make it possible for us to actually save money for our own place instead of throwing everything away on some overpriced rental in a terrible neighborhood." David's enthusiasm had seemed genuine and had reflected his understanding of both the financial value of my offer and the trust it represented. His background in graphic design had given him an appreciation for the apartment's aesthetic qualities and the cultural richness of the Roosevelt Row neighborhood, while his experience with Phoenix's rental market had helped him understand exactly how much money my generosity would save them. "I really appreciate your faith in us, Mom," David had continued during that conversation. "I know how much this apartment means to you, and I promise we'll be respectful of your space and help with whatever you need around the house. We want this to work well for everyone." Karen had been equally appreciative, expressing genuine gratitude for the opportunity to live in downtown Phoenix while maintaining the savings goals that would eventually allow them to purchase their own home. Her practical nature had led her to understand immediately the financial implications of my offer and the responsibility it entailed. "Eleanor, this is such a wonderful opportunity for us to save money while spending more time with family," Karen had said during our initial discussions about the arrangement. "We understand what a big step this is for you, and we want you to know that we'll always consider this your home first and respect your preferences about how things are managed. The initial months of our shared living arrangement had exceeded my expectations in terms of harmony and mutual respect." David and Karen had been considerate housemates who respected my routines and preferences while contributing to household maintenance and expenses as we'd agreed. They'd been genuinely grateful for the opportunity and had frequently expressed appreciation for my generosity and flexibility. During this honeymoon period, our family dinners had been pleasant occasions where we'd discussed their career development, my real estate consulting projects, and shared interests in urban development and neighborhood revitalization. David and Karen had been interested in learning about my professional background and had asked thoughtful questions about property management, real estate investment, and the changes I'd witnessed in Phoenix's downtown development over my decades in the industry. Karen had been particularly helpful with household organization and had volunteered to handle grocery shopping and meal preparation several days per week, contributions that had been both practically useful and emotionally meaningful, as evidence of her genuine appreciation for our living arrangement. David had taken responsibility for technical support and had helped me optimize the apartment's smart home systems while also assisting with routine maintenance tasks that required physical strength or technical knowledge. The arrangement had seemed so successful that I'd begun to consider whether it might become a long-term situation that would provide mutual benefits for years to come. I'd even started thinking about how we might modify the lease agreement to give them more formal tenant rights while ensuring that my own financial and housing security remained protected as I continued to age. But during the summer of 2023, subtle changes had begun to appear in David and Karen's attitude toward our living arrangement. These shifts had been gradual and initially easy to rationalize as natural adjustments as they'd become more comfortable and established in both the apartment and their professional lives. The first indication that something fundamental was changing had occurred during a family barbecue on the rooftop in July 2023, when Karen had made several comments about space limitations and privacy concerns that had surprised me with their implication that our current arrangement was becoming inadequate, rather than continuing to serve as a generous opportunity they were grateful to receive. "Eleanor, David, and I have been talking about how we could optimize the space better," Karen had said during our outdoor dinner while gesturing toward the city lights that sparkled below us. "We're wondering if there might be ways to reconfigure the living areas to create more privacy and storage, maybe even convert your office into a proper guest room so we could have overnight visitors more comfortably." The suggestion that my home office should be converted to accommodate their social needs had been the first clear indication that Karen was beginning to view the apartment as their space, rather than my home where they were welcome guests. The office contained my professional materials, reference library, and the filing systems where I maintained records of my various real estate investments and consulting projects that continued to provide income during my retirement. We've also been thinking that it might make sense to rearrange the living room furniture to create more distinct areas for different activities, David had added, reinforcing Karen's implications that the apartment should be modified to serve their preferences rather than maintaining the arrangements that I'd established over 8 years of living there. My response had been diplomatically non-committal, as I'd wanted to avoid family conflict while also making clear that I wasn't interested in making significant changes to the living arrangements that had served my needs perfectly and represented my personal taste and lifestyle preferences developed over decades of independent living. "Those are interesting ideas," I'd replied carefully. "But I've been very happy with the current setup, and I'm not really interested in making major changes right now. Maybe we can discuss smaller adjustments if specific issues come up." But Karen's reaction to my response had been the first indication that she and David had developed expectations about their role in apartment management that went far beyond what I'd intended when I'd invited them to share my living space at a dramatically reduced cost. "Eleanor, I think you should consider that this space needs to serve everyone who lives here," Karen had said, using a tone that suggested she viewed my reluctance as unreasonable rather than a legitimate expression of my preferences as the primary tenant and financial contributor. David and I are adults with our own needs and opinions about how the space should be organized. This conversation had been followed by several similar discussions over the following months, in which David and Karen had repeatedly suggested modifications, improvements, and changes to the apartment's organization and management that had seemed designed more to establish their authority over decision-making than to actually address practical problems or enhance our shared living experience. By early fall 2023, these conversations had escalated to include suggestions about my personal habits and lifestyle choices that had made me increasingly uncomfortable and had started to feel more like criticism than collaborative household management discussions. "Eleanor, we think you might want to consider simplifying some of your routines," David had said during a particularly memorable family dinner in September 2023. "The apartment feels cluttered with all your files and business materials, and we think everyone would be more comfortable if you moved some of that stuff to a storage unit or maybe found a small office space where you could handle your consulting work." The suggestion that I should remove my professional materials from my own home office had been both insulting and concerning, particularly given that my consulting work provided income that supplemented my retirement savings, and that the office space was essential for managing my various real estate investments and financial affairs. "I appreciate your concern," I'd replied, "but my office setup works perfectly for my needs, and I'm not interested in paying for external storage or office space when I have a perfectly adequate workspace here." But Karen had been prepared with what had appeared to be carefully thought-out arguments about the benefits of streamlining my lifestyle and creating more shared space for family activities and entertainment. "Eleanor, we've been researching some really convenient storage facilities and executive office centers that would give you professional space without taking up so much room here," Karen had said, producing brochures that she'd apparently collected in advance of the conversation. "Some of these places are really nice and would let you maintain your business activities without the apartment feeling so much like a workplace. The assumption that my home should be modified to eliminate evidence of my professional activities had been shocking both for its presumption and for its complete disregard for my clearly expressed satisfaction with my current arrangements and my obvious competence in managing both my living space and my business affairs. Standing in my apartment, that cold February morning, surrounded by the urban lifestyle and professional success I'd worked decades to achieve, looking out at the Phoenix skyline that had provided daily inspiration and satisfaction for 8 years, I had no idea that the family members I'd been supporting and trusting with my most private living space were about to reveal the true scope of their plans during a confrontation that would change everything forever and demonstrate exactly what happened when people assumed they could manipulate. Someone with my property management experience, professional connections, and determination to protect what I'd worked my entire life to build. Sometimes the people who think you're just a vulnerable elderly woman whose living space they can control and redesign are about to discover you're actually someone with the real estate expertise and financial resources necessary to completely reverse the power dynamic while teaching them the most expensive lesson about respect and consequences they'll ever receive. David and Karen were about to learn that treating someone like a burden was the beginning of the most comprehensive property acquisition strategy they'd ever encountered, and the most costly mistake they'd ever make in their personal, professional, and family lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I reached this point of complete vindication, you need to know about the professional expertise and industry connections that David and Karen were dismissing as outdated thinking. The same knowledge and resources that would ultimately give me the power to become their landlord and teach them that some assumptions about elderly family members are too dangerous to make when you're dealing with someone who understands property management better than they ever imagined possible. Standing in my home office that February morning, reviewing the property management awards and industry recognition certificates that lined my built-in shelving, I couldn't help but reflect on how drastically different David and Karen's attitude toward my professional expertise had been just 2 years earlier. When David had been a struggling college graduate desperate for the kind of industry guidance and networking, connections that only someone with my experience and reputation in Phoenix's commercial real estate community could provide. It was a relationship that had been built on genuine respect for my capabilities and sincere gratitude for the sacrifices I'd made to ensure his success. A time when David had spoken with such enthusiasm about learning from my expertise and building a career that would honor the professional standards and innovative approaches that had defined my 35 years in commercial property management and real estate investment. But to understand how I'd reached this point of casual dismissal from family members who should have been celebrating my continued success and professional acumen, rather than treating my business judgment as evidence of outdated thinking, you need to know about the life of property management mastery and real estate innovation I'd built before David and Karen decided my expertise was something irrelevant rather than invaluable. A life of groundbreaking property management work, industry leadership, and the kind of strategic thinking that had made their systematic underestimation both possible and ultimately catastrophic for their own housing security. My journey to that frustrating February morning had begun 70 years earlier, when I'd been born Eleanor Ruth Garcia to parents who understood that a woman's education and professional competence were not optional luxuries, but essential foundations for survival and dignity in a world that rarely offered women second chances, or easy paths to financial independence and professional recognition, particularly in the male-dominated field of commercial real estate that would become my specialty and passion throughout my working life. My father, Roberto Garcia, had been a construction supervisor for one of Phoenix's major residential development companies during the city's explosive growth period in the 1960s and 1970s, specializing in large-scale subdivision projects and master-planned communities that had helped shape Phoenix's expansion into the Sonoran Desert and had established the foundation for the metropolitan area's eventual emergence as one of the fastest-growing regions in the United States. "Mija," my father had said during one of our regular Sunday evening conversations about my future plans while we sat on our small apartment's balcony watching the desert sunset, "the most important thing you can learn is that real estate is fundamentally about understanding how property values, market forces, and human behavior intersect to create wealth or destroy it. Anyone can learn to collect rent or show apartments, but it takes real expertise to understand how properties actually function as investments and how to protect people's financial security through intelligent property management." My mother, Carmen Garcia, had been equally influential in shaping my understanding of what was possible for an educated woman willing to work harder and think more strategically than the people around her. She'd worked as a bookkeeper for several small real estate companies in Phoenix, analyzing property performance and tenant relationships, while also managing our household with the kind of meticulous attention to detail and analytical thinking that had kept our family's finances both stable and growing despite the economic uncertainties that had characterized the rapidly changing Southwest during the 1960s and 1970s. Eleanor, my mother had told me during my high school years while helping me with homework at our kitchen table, never let anyone convince you that understanding property management and real estate finance is somehow too complicated or inappropriate for women. The women I know who have the most security and independence are those who understand how rental properties work, can read financial statements critically, and refuse to depend on other people for their economic survival or professional advancement. The Garcia household had been intellectually stimulating and academically rigorous in ways that had prepared me for the real estate career I would eventually build. Dinner conversations had regularly included discussions of property values, market trends, construction quality, and the importance of building professional expertise that could function reliably under pressure, while also contributing to the fair and ethical management of rental properties that affected families' most important housing decisions. Our home had been filled with real estate trade publications, construction industry magazines, and the kind of analytical thinking that had made complex property management problems seem solvable rather than overwhelming. By age 16, I'd already been helping my parents with basic financial analysis and had developed sophisticated understanding of property valuation, tenant relations, and the relationship between property management theory and practical outcomes that would characterize my entire approach to real estate investment and management practice. My academic journey had begun at Phoenix Union High School, a large public school known for its rigorous business and mathematics programs and its emphasis on developing students' analytical thinking, precise communication, and the kind of practical, problem-solving skills that would serve them well in competitive professional environments throughout their careers in Arizona's growing economy. At Phoenix Union, I'd excelled in mathematics, business studies, accounting, and economics, while also developing the organizational skills and attention to detail that would characterize my entire approach to professional responsibilities. The school's student body had included children of construction workers, real estate professionals, and small business owners who understood that academic excellence and practical skills were the primary paths to professional recognition and financial independence in Phoenix's rapidly expanding business community. Miss Garcia, my senior economics teacher, had written in a recommendation letter that I'd treasured throughout my career, demonstrates the rare combination of analytical intelligence and practical business sense that characterizes natural property managers and real estate professionals. She has the mathematical skills to understand complex financial relationships and the personal presence to manage tenant relationships effectively in challenging situations. My senior project at Phoenix Union had focused on the economic impact of Phoenix's rapid population growth on housing markets and rental property values, research that had required me to analyze demographic data, interview local property managers about their experiences with changing tenant demographics, and develop original arguments about how rapid urban growth affected property management strategies and tenant satisfaction over multiple economic cycles. Arizona State University's business school had been the obvious next step, offering one of the most respected real estate and property management programs in the Southwest, and a curriculum that combined rigorous analytical training with practical experience in professional property management practice and specialization opportunities in areas like commercial real estate, residential property management, and real estate finance that would prepare graduates for leadership roles in Arizona's booming real estate industry. During my 4 years at ASU, I'd maintained a 3.7 GPA while also working part-time as an administrative assistant for the university's Real Estate Development Institute and completing internships with major Phoenix property management companies that had provided hands-on experience in every aspect of property management, from routine maintenance coordination to complex tenant relations and financial analysis involving properties worth millions of dollars. The business program at ASU had been particularly comprehensive, requiring students to develop expertise in accounting, finance, marketing, operations management, and business law, while also completing advanced coursework in specialized areas, and demonstrating competence in financial analysis, tenant relations, and property maintenance management that would be essential for successful property management practice in Arizona's competitive and rapidly changing real estate market. Eleanor has demonstrated exceptional ability in both the analytical and practical aspects of property management education, my property management professor had written during my junior year. Her coursework consistently demonstrates sophisticated understanding of complex financial principles while also exhibiting the kind of strategic thinking and attention to detail that characterizes truly effective practicing property managers. My senior thesis had examined innovative approaches to affordable housing management in rapidly growing Sunbelt cities, focusing on how traditional property management strategies could be modified to better serve the needs of diverse tenant populations while protecting property owners' investments and promoting responsible development that enhanced community character and property values. The research had required extensive analysis of management practices, regulatory frameworks, and case studies, while also developing original proposals that demonstrated practical applications of property management theory to contemporary housing challenges. The thesis had been selected for publication in the Arizona Real Estate Journal and had received recognition from the Arizona Association of Property Managers as an outstanding example of how young professionals could contribute to solving contemporary property management challenges while building expertise in specialized practice areas that would serve both individual property owners and broader community interests. After graduating summa cum laude from ASU in 1976, I'd spent 3 years working for Southwestern Property Management, a prestigious Phoenix firm specializing in commercial and high-end residential property management that represented some of the region's most significant property owners, developers, and institutional investors in complex management agreements worth hundreds of millions of dollars in total property value. The position at Southwestern Property Management had been excellent preparation for understanding the business and financial aspects of property management practice, and had given me experience in the kind of high-stakes problem-solving that would become central to my career specialization in complex property management and tenant relations challenges that required both analytical expertise and sophisticated understanding of real estate markets and property maintenance practices. The firm's portfolio had included everything from luxury apartment complexes to major office buildings, shopping centers, and mixed-use developments, requiring management strategies that address the unique challenges of different property types, while maintaining consistent standards for financial performance, tenant satisfaction, and property maintenance that protected long-term property values and investor returns. Eleanor, you have a natural talent for understanding how properties actually work as business investments, my supervising manager at Southwestern Property Management had observed after I'd successfully resolved a complex tenant dispute that had threatened to result in expensive litigation and significant revenue loss. You don't just understand property management procedures. You understand market dynamics and tenant psychology, and how to structure management approaches that work for everyone involved while protecting property owners' interests. One of my most successful projects at the firm had involved managing the lease-up and stabilization of a newly constructed 200-unit luxury apartment complex in Scottsdale that had been struggling with low occupancy rates and tenant complaints about maintenance responsiveness. The project had required 6 months of intensive marketing strategy development, tenant relations improvement, and maintenance system redesign that had ultimately achieved 95% occupancy and tenant satisfaction scores that exceeded industry benchmarks. Ms. Garcia has demonstrated exceptional ability in developing creative management solutions for complex property challenges, the property owners had written in a testimonial letter that had become essential marketing material for my developing reputation. Her understanding of both tenant needs and property economics made it possible for us to achieve our occupancy and revenue goals while building a management operation that exceeded our expectations for both efficiency and tenant satisfaction. The luxury apartment project had been particularly meaningful because it had demonstrated how sophisticated property management analysis could transform struggling properties into profitable investments, turning a situation that others had viewed as problematic into the foundation for long-term financial success and tenant satisfaction. The project had also given me my first taste of the satisfaction that came from proving conventional wisdom wrong through superior property management knowledge and creative problem-solving. It was during my time at Southwestern Property Management that I'd first begun to understand the enormous gap between what most people expected from property management services and what was actually possible when sophisticated management principles were applied to the challenges of property operations, tenant relations, and maintenance coordination in ways that enhanced both property values and tenant satisfaction while building long-term community stability. This insight had led directly to my decision to establish my own property management practice in 1979, specializing in the kind of innovative property management that could transform how property owners thought about tenant relations, maintenance strategies, and the relationship between management expertise and financial success in Phoenix's rapidly evolving real estate market. The decision to start Martinez Property Management had been motivated by my desire to focus exclusively on the kind of client-centered property management that had become my specialty, working with property owners who needed sophisticated management representation, but also wanted a property manager who understood their investment goals and could develop management strategies that supported their long-term financial and property objectives. Martinez Property Management had begun operations in a small office in Central Phoenix, with a staff of one part-time administrative assistant and a portfolio of 12 residential properties that had followed me from Southwestern Property Management because the owners valued the personalized attention and innovative management approaches that had characterized my work throughout my early career. The firm's first major contract had been managing a 50-unit apartment complex whose previous management company had been terminated due to declining occupancy, increasing maintenance costs, and tenant complaints that had resulted in code violations and potential legal liability. The property had required 18 months of intensive rehabilitation and tenant relations work, but my management strategies and maintenance coordination had ultimately resulted in full occupancy and property improvements that had increased the building's value by over 40%. Eleanor Martinez has transformed our property investment through management expertise that went far beyond what we thought was possible, the owners had written in a letter that had become essential marketing material for my growing practice. Her understanding of property operations and tenant relations enabled us to turn a problematic investment into our most profitable property. Her management has changed our entire approach to real estate investment. Over the following decade, Martinez Property Management had built a reputation as Phoenix's premier boutique property management firm, handling complex properties and challenging management situations for clients ranging from individual property investors to major developers, with a consistent focus on creative management solutions that protected property owners' investments, while building long-term tenant satisfaction and avoiding unnecessary maintenance costs and legal complications. My approach had consistently emphasized the importance of understanding property owners' actual goals and developing management strategies that served both their immediate needs and their long-term financial and property objectives, creating management relationships that enhanced property values rather than simply collecting rent and responding to maintenance requests. One of my most challenging and rewarding management contracts during this period had been a historic downtown Phoenix apartment building that had been purchased by an out-of-state investor who wanted to preserve its architectural character while improving its financial performance and tenant satisfaction. The property had required extensive historical research, specialized maintenance approaches, and innovative tenant relations strategies that had ultimately resulted in landmark designation and a management operation that had become a model for historic property preservation and profitable operation. Eleanor Martinez has accomplished management results that we were told were impossible, the property owner had written in a testimonial that I'd treasured throughout my career. Her understanding of historic properties, tenant relations, and financial management enabled us to preserve architectural character while achieving financial performance that exceeded our projections. Her management has transformed both our property and our understanding of what's possible in historic property investment. By the mid-1980s, Martinez Property Management had become one of Phoenix's most respected property management practices, with a client base that included some of the region's most successful property investors and developers, as well as individual property owners who needed sophisticated management representation for their real estate investments and property development projects. The recognition that had meant the most to me during this period had come in 1987 when the Arizona Association of Property Managers had presented me with their Outstanding Achievement in Property Management Award, acknowledging not just individual properties but my overall contribution to advancing property management practice and property owner representation standards throughout the Southwest. Eleanor Martinez has spent over a decade proving that property management can serve both property owners and tenant communities through management excellence that protects investment values while promoting responsible property operations. The award citation had read, "Her work has enhanced Arizona's property management landscape while establishing standards for tenant relations and management innovation that have influenced property managers throughout the region." The 1990s had brought new challenges and opportunities as Phoenix's real estate market had experienced dramatic growth and increasing complexity that had required even more sophisticated management expertise and market knowledge to navigate successfully. My practice had evolved to handle larger and more complex properties while maintaining the client-centered approach that had built my reputation. During this period, I'd managed some of the most significant residential and commercial properties in Phoenix's history, including the management contracts for several major mixed-use developments, the creation of innovative tenant retention programs that had become industry standards, and complex property repositioning projects that had established important precedents for balancing historic preservation with modern property management efficiency. The most personally satisfying management contract of my career had occurred in 1995, when I'd been hired to manage a portfolio of affordable housing properties whose previous management had been exploiting vulnerable tenants through illegal fee structures and maintenance negligence that had created unsafe living conditions. The properties had required 2 years of intensive rehabilitation and tenant advocacy work, but the results had included regulatory compliance, tenant satisfaction improvements, and management practices that had protected hundreds of families, while establishing stronger consumer protection standards for affordable housing management throughout Arizona. Eleanor Martinez has protected our community when no one else would address management problems that were destroying families' housing security, the Tenant Association had written in a letter that had been published in the Arizona Republic. Her management expertise and commitment to ethical property operations saved our homes and our neighborhood. Her representation proved that property management can be both profitable and ethical when conducted by someone with courage and professional knowledge. By 2000, when I'd been practicing property management for over 20 years, Martinez Property Management had become synonymous with excellence in property operations throughout the Southwest, with a track record of successful management contracts that had protected millions of dollars in property values, while establishing management precedents that had influenced property management practice throughout the region. The new millennium had brought opportunities to expand my practice into new areas of specialization, including senior housing management and age-restricted community operations that had become increasingly important as Phoenix's population had aged and property management had become more specialized. My expertise in residential property management had provided a natural foundation for understanding the complex intersection of housing management, tenant services, and long-term property maintenance that had become central to my practice during the final phase of my career. The most significant achievement of my later career had been the development of innovative senior housing management strategies that had combined property management expertise with tenant advocacy to help create housing communities that preserved independence while providing security, ultimately serving as models for age-friendly housing. management that balanced tenant needs with property investment requirements. Eleanor Martinez has revolutionized how we think about senior housing management. Dr. Patricia Williams, a gerontology specialist and housing advocate, had noted in a professional journal article about my innovative approaches. Her understanding of property management enables her to develop housing operations that protect tenant independence while maintaining property values in ways that traditional approaches cannot achieve. The recognition that had meant the most to me had come in 2010 when the National Association of Property Managers had presented me with their Lifetime Achievement Award in Property Management, recognizing not just individual achievements, but my overall contribution to advancing the practice of property management and protecting both property owner interests and tenant rights throughout a career that had spanned over 3 decades. Eleanor Martinez has spent 35 years proving that management excellence and tenant advocacy can coexist with innovation and financial responsibility, the award citation had read. Her practice has enhanced the property management profession, while demonstrating that property management can serve both property investment goals and community housing needs through expertise, integrity, and commitment to ethical operations. By the time I'd decided to semi-retire in 2015, Martinez Property Management had handled over 500 properties representing more than $800 million in total property values, had established important management precedents that had protected tenant rights throughout Arizona, and had built a reputation for management excellence that had influenced property management practice throughout the Southwest. But standing in my home office that February morning, surrounded by the awards, client testimonials, and professional relationships that represented 35 years of property management achievement, I had no understanding that the family, members I'd been supporting and mentoring for years, were about to dismiss my expertise as outdated thinking, revealing the true scope of their misunderstanding and setting in motion events that would demonstrate exactly what happened when people underestimated someone with my property management capabilities and determination to protect what I'd worked my entire life to build. The property management expertise, professional relationships, industry recognition, and strategic thinking that David and Karen were dismissing as irrelevant to contemporary housing arrangements were actually going to become the foundation for teaching them the most comprehensive lesson they'd ever receive about respecting experience, honoring expertise, and understanding that some people respond to manipulation with property acquisition strategies that reshape everyone's understanding of what's possible when knowledge meets determination and unlimited access to real estate investment resources. Sometimes the people who think your career is just ancient history are about to discover you're actually someone with the property management knowledge and strategic thinking necessary to become their landlord, while teaching them that dismissing someone's professional legacy was the beginning of the most sophisticated real estate response they'd ever encounter, and the most expensive mistake they'd ever make in their personal and housing lives. Standing in that office, surrounded by decades of property management expertise and ongoing connections to Phoenix's real estate investment community, I had no idea that David and Karen were about to reveal their true intentions during a family confrontation that would demonstrate exactly why underestimating a property management professional with my experience and determination was about to become the most costly error in judgment they'd ever make. The property management knowledge and real estate investment connections that they were treating as irrelevant relics of my past were actually going to become the tools for completely reversing our family's power dynamic while teaching them that some 70-year-old women fight back with strategies that permanently alter housing arrangements and family relationships in ways that create consequences lasting for generations. Standing in my apartment that February morning, reviewing the family photographs and property management achievement awards that documented years of what I'd believed was genuine collaboration and mutual respect, I couldn't help but remember how different David and Karen's attitude toward my judgment and autonomy had been just 18 months earlier, when they'd regularly sought my advice about rental markets and property management, and had expressed sincere gratitude for the opportunities and security that my professional success had provided for our entire family. But what I discovered during the escalating months of manipulation and pressure would transform my disappointment and sense of betrayal into a cold, calculating determination that would change everything forever and demonstrate that some 70-year-old women fight back with property acquisition strategies that reshape entire family dynamics and housing arrangements in ways that create consequences lasting for generations. The Roosevelt Row apartment that had become the center of this family conflict represented far more than just an expensive piece of real estate or a convenient downtown address. This 1,450-square-foot corner unit had become the foundation of my carefully constructed retirement lifestyle, the headquarters for my continued consulting work, and the symbol of everything I'd achieved through 3.5 decades of building expertise in one of Arizona's most competitive and rapidly changing industries. To understand why I was willing to fight so hard to protect my living situation and why David and Karen's manipulation represented such a fundamental threat to my security and independence, you need to understand the journey that had brought me to this spectacular downtown apartment and the strategic thinking that had guided every decision about where and how I would spend my retirement years. The process of finding and securing this apartment had begun in late 2015, as I'd been transitioning Martinez Property Management to a smaller scale of operations and beginning to plan for the lifestyle changes that would characterize my 70s. After nearly 4 decades of managing properties throughout Phoenix, I'd developed very specific criteria for what would constitute ideal retirement housing. Urban location, with walkable access to cultural amenities and medical facilities. High-quality construction and maintenance standards. Security features appropriate for aging in place. And a community of residents who would provide both social opportunities and mutual support as we all navigated the challenges of growing older in an increasingly complex world. My search had been informed by professional knowledge that most people my age simply didn't possess. Having managed hundreds of properties over the years, I understood exactly what to look for in building construction, mechanical systems, management, company competence, and long-term maintenance planning. I knew which downtown Phoenix neighborhoods were likely to continue appreciating in value and which building amenities would become more important as I aged. Most critically, I understood how to evaluate lease terms, building policies, and management practices to ensure that my housing security would be protected regardless of changes in ownership, management, or market conditions. The Roosevelt Row location had immediately appealed to me because of my professional understanding of urban development patterns and neighborhood revitalization trends. Having worked in Phoenix real estate since the 1970s, I'd witnessed multiple cycles of downtown development and had learned to recognize the early indicators of successful neighborhood transformation. When I'd first toured the area in 2015, Roosevelt Row had been in the early stages of gentrification, with clear signs that it would become one of Phoenix's premier urban neighborhoods within a decade. The indicators had been obvious to someone with my background: increasing property values, improving retail and restaurant offerings, growing arts and cultural programming, enhanced public transportation connections, and the kind of demographic shifts that typically preceded successful urban revitalization. The light rail station had provided convenient access to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, downtown employment centers, and the broader metropolitan area without requiring car ownership. The proximity to medical facilities had been particularly important, as I'd wanted to ensure that aging-related healthcare needs could be addressed without lengthy commutes or complicated transportation arrangements. The building itself had represented exactly the kind of adaptive reuse project that I'd learned to value during my property management career. The 1925 Phoenix Textile Manufacturing Warehouse had been converted with exceptional attention to both historic preservation and modern functionality, creating residential units that honored the building's industrial heritage, while providing contemporary amenities and accessibility features that would serve residents well throughout their aging process. My professional experience had enabled me to evaluate the conversion quality in ways that typical apartment hunters couldn't. I'd examined the mechanical systems, reviewed the building's maintenance records, analyzed the management company's reputation, and financial stability, and assess the long-term sustainability of the building operations in ways that had given me confidence that this would be a stable and well-maintained housing option for decades to come. The apartment unit itself had been selected with careful consideration of my current needs and future requirements. The corner location provided maximum natural light and cross-ventilation, features that would become increasingly important for mood and health as I aged. The open concept design eliminated barriers that might become problematic for mobility aids if needed. The master bedroom's ensuite bathroom had been designed with aging-in-place features that demonstrated the developer's understanding of the target demographic. Most importantly, the second bedroom had been perfect for conversion to a home office, where I could continue my property management consulting work and manage my various real estate investments. Having this dedicated workspace had been essential for maintaining the professional activities that provided both income and intellectual stimulation during retirement. The built-in shelving had accommodated my extensive reference library, and the morning light exposure had created an ideal environment for the detailed financial analysis and report. Writing that characterized my ongoing consulting projects. The balcony had provided outdoor space for container gardening and relaxation while maintaining the security and low-maintenance lifestyle that had become priorities as I'd planned for aging in place. The automated irrigation systems and weather-resistant planters had enabled me to maintain herb and vegetable gardens that provided both fresh produce and the satisfaction of nurturing growing things without the physical demands of traditional gardening. But beyond the physical features and location advantages, the apartment had represented something even more important: proof that my decades of hard work and professional expertise had created the financial security and lifestyle options that had always been my goals for retirement. The ability to afford luxury downtown living while maintaining professional activities and family relationships had been the culmination of everything I'd worked to achieve throughout my career. The financial aspects of securing the apartment had demonstrated the value of my property management expertise in ways that had given me deep satisfaction. The initial lease negotiation had benefited from my understanding of rental market dynamics and landlord psychology. I'd been able to structure lease terms that provided security against arbitrary rent increases while maintaining flexibility for modifications that might become necessary as I aged. My relationship with the management company, Desert Urban Properties, had been enhanced by my professional credibility and industry knowledge. They'd recognized me as a knowledgeable tenant who understood property operations and would be a responsible resident who would contribute to building community and property value preservation. This relationship had enabled me to secure approval for aging-in-place modifications and had provided access to building services and maintenance priority that had enhanced both my safety and comfort. The monthly rent of $2,100 had represented a significant but manageable expense within my retirement budget. My property management consulting income, combined with retirement savings and investment returns from my various real estate holdings, had provided sufficient cash flow to maintain this lifestyle while building reserves for future health care needs and potential long-term care expenses. More importantly, the rent had been structured as a percentage of my income rather than a fixed expense that might become burdensome if my financial situation changed. My consulting work had continued to provide $3,500 to $5,500 per month in additional income, depending on project availability and seasonal demand. This income had made the apartment rent easily affordable while providing financial security and the ability to maintain my preferred lifestyle without concern about housing costs. The appreciation in rental values since 2016 had validated my decision to choose Roosevelt Row and had demonstrated the ongoing value of my professional judgment about real estate markets and neighborhood development patterns. Comparable units in the building had increased from $2,100 to over $3,500 per month, representing a market appreciation that had effectively provided me with substantial housing equity despite being a renter rather than an owner. This appreciation had also highlighted the generous nature of my decision to allow David and Karen to live in the apartment at such a dramatically reduced rate. When they'd moved in 18 months earlier, market rent for the apartment had been approximately $2,800 per month. By February 2024, comparable units were renting for $3,200 to $3,800 per month, depending on specific features and lease terms. My decision to charge David and Karen only $800 per month had been based on my desire to help them save money while covering their proportional share of utilities, internet, and incidental household expenses. But as market rents had continued to increase, this arrangement had evolved into a subsidy worth over $2,000 per month. A gift that had represented nearly $36,000 per year in housing value that I'd been providing to help them achieve their financial goals. The magnitude of this subsidy had made David and Karen's growing demands for control over the apartment's management and their pressure for me to relocate particularly insulting and concerning. Rather than appreciating the enormous financial benefit they'd been receiving, they'd begun treating my generosity as evidence that I was financially naive or unable to understand the true value of what I was providing. The apartment had also served as the operational headquarters for my continued involvement in Phoenix's real estate community and my ongoing consulting work with property owners throughout the metropolitan area. The home office had been equipped with the technology and reference materials necessary to maintain my professional activities at the level of competence and responsiveness that my clients expected. My consulting practice during retirement had focused on specialized projects that leveraged my decades of experience while allowing flexible scheduling that accommodated travel and family activities. These projects had included property acquisition analysis for out-of-state investors, management system design for complex properties, tenant relations consulting for challenging situations, and expert witness services for property management, litigation cases. The intellectual stimulation and professional recognition that had come from this consulting work had been essential for my mental health and sense of purpose during retirement. The projects had kept me engaged with current industry trends and had provided opportunities to apply my expertise to new challenges while maintaining relationships with colleagues and clients who valued my knowledge and experience. The income from consulting work had also provided financial flexibility that had enhanced my security and independence. Rather than depending entirely on retirement savings and investment returns, I'd been able to supplement my income through work that I enjoyed and that utilized my professional strengths. This income had enabled me to maintain my preferred lifestyle, while building reserves for future needs without concern about market volatility or unexpected expenses. The apartment's location had been particularly valuable for maintaining these professional relationships and consulting opportunities. The downtown Phoenix address had provided credibility and convenience for client meetings, while the proximity to law offices, business centers, and industry events had kept me connected to the professional community that had been central to my career satisfaction throughout my working life. The Roosevelt Row neighborhood had also provided the cultural and social opportunities that had become increasingly important as I'd aged. The walkable access to galleries, theaters, restaurants, and community events had enabled me to maintain an active social life without depending on others for transportation. The demographic diversity of the neighborhood had provided opportunities to build friendships across generational and cultural lines in ways that had enriched my retirement experience. The building's resident community had been another crucial factor in my decision to maintain this living arrangement, despite David and Karen's pressure to relocate. Over 8 years of residence, I'd developed genuine friendships with neighbors who had become an important support network and social circle. These relationships had provided both practical assistance when needed and the kind of intellectual and emotional companionship that had made aging in place both feasible and enjoyable. The monthly resident social events, informal coffee gatherings, and collaborative building improvement projects had created a sense of community that had been particularly valuable for someone living alone. My neighbors had included retired professionals who shared similar interests and values, younger residents who brought energy and technological expertise to building activities, and long-term urban dwellers who had provided wisdom about navigating city services and resources. My role within this community had been enhanced by my property management expertise, which had enabled me to contribute to building governance and management oversight in ways that had benefited all residents. I'd served on the resident advisory committee that worked with the management company to address building policies and improvement priorities. My professional knowledge had been valuable for evaluating proposed rent increases, building maintenance standards, and policy changes that affected resident rights and building operations. This community involvement had provided both purpose and recognition that had been essential for my sense of worth and belonging during retirement. Rather than being marginalized as an elderly resident who was gradually becoming less capable and relevant, I'd been valued as someone whose expertise and experience contributed to the building's success and resident satisfaction. The security features of the building and apartment had become increasingly important as I'd aged and had represented another crucial factor in my determination to maintain this living arrangement. The controlled access systems, security monitoring, concierge services, and emergency response capabilities had provided peace of mind that would have been difficult to replicate in other housing options. The building's design had incorporated aging-in-place features that had made it possible for me to maintain independence while ensuring safety and accessibility. The elevator access to all floors, wide hallways and doorways, accessible bathroom fixtures, and emergency call systems had created an environment where I could continue living independently without concern about mobility limitations or emergency situations. The proximity to medical facilities had been another crucial advantage that had influenced my determination to resist David and Karen's pressure to relocate. The downtown Phoenix location had provided walking or short transit access to major hospitals, medical specialists, and healthcare services that would become increasingly important as I aged. The convenience of accessing medical care without depending on others for transportation had been a significant factor in my housing security and independence planning. The apartment had also served as a symbol of my successful transition from full-time property management practice to a more balanced retirement lifestyle that had maintained professional engagement while providing time for family relationships, travel, and personal interests. The ability to maintain this lifestyle while providing significant financial support to David and Karen had represented the achievement of goals that had motivated my entire career. Standing in my home office that February morning, surrounded by the evidence of professional success and personal satisfaction that had made this apartment the perfect retirement headquarters, I was beginning to understand that David and Karen's campaign to force my relocation represented more than just family disagreement about living arrangements. Their manipulation was a direct attack on everything I'd worked to achieve, and a fundamental challenge to my right to make my own decisions about how and where I would spend my remaining years. The Roosevelt Row apartment was not just an address or a convenient place to live. It was the foundation of my carefully constructed retirement lifestyle, the symbol of my professional achievements, and the headquarters for my continued contributions to Phoenix's real estate community. David and Karen's attempts to force me out of this home represented an assault on my autonomy, my financial security, and my right to age in place according to my own values and preferences. But what they didn't understand was that my determination to protect this lifestyle was backed by decades of property management expertise and professional relationships that had given me resources and options they couldn't imagine. Their assumption that I was vulnerable and dependent on their approval for my housing decisions was about to collide with the reality of what I'd learned about property acquisition and tenant rights during 35 years of building expertise in exactly these kinds of challenging situations. Sometimes the people who think they can pressure someone into giving up their home are about to discover they're dealing with someone who understands property management well enough to become their landlord and teach them exactly what happens when you underestimate someone with my knowledge, resources, and determination to protect what I've worked my entire life to build and maintain. The stakes of this family conflict were about to become much higher than David and Karen had imagined, and the consequences of their manipulation were about to extend far beyond anything they'd considered when they'd started treating my generosity as weakness and my age as evidence of diminished capability. They were about to learn that some people fight back with property acquisition strategies that permanently reshape family relationships and housing arrangements in ways that create lessons lasting for generations. The systematic campaign to force me out of my own home had begun subtly in November 2023, when Karen's parents, Robert and Patricia Williams, had come to visit for what was supposed to be a week-long stay during Thanksgiving. What I hadn't expected was that their visit would become a carefully orchestrated evaluation of my apartment as potential living space for themselves, combined with an assessment of my daily routines and capabilities designed to build a case for why I should relocate to make room for their more pressing housing needs. Eleanor, Bob, and Pat are really impressed with the downtown location, Karen had said during their third day of the visit, while her parents sat in my living room making detailed observations about the apartment's layout and amenities. They've been talking about how convenient it would be to have urban access to cultural events and medical facilities as they get older. Phoenix has so much more to offer than Tucson. The implication that her parents were considering relocating to Phoenix hadn't seemed particularly concerning at first. But the way Karen had presented this information while gesturing around my apartment had suggested that she was already thinking about housing solutions that would involve my living space, rather than encouraging her parents to find their own accommodations in the competitive downtown rental market. "We've been looking at rental prices in this area," Robert Williams had added, producing his smartphone to show me real estate listings that he'd apparently been researching throughout their visit. "These units are really expensive now. It's amazing that you've been able to maintain such a nice place on a retirement income." The subtle questioning of my financial capacity to maintain my apartment had been the first clear indication that Karen's parents were viewing my housing situation not as my successful retirement planning, but as an opportunity that might become available if I could be persuaded or pressured to make different living arrangements that would better serve their convenience and financial limitations. But the most concerning aspect of their visit had been the systematic way they'd begun documenting my daily routines and making observations about my capabilities that had seemed designed to support arguments about my need for assistance or more appropriate housing for someone my age. Eleanor seems to have some difficulty with the stairs to the rooftop, Patricia Williams had mentioned to David and Karen during a conversation she'd apparently assumed I couldn't hear from the kitchen. And I noticed she's been having trouble opening some of the jars in the pantry. Maybe she'd be more comfortable in a place that's more manageable for her changing needs. The suggestion that I was experiencing physical limitations that made my apartment inappropriate had been both factually incorrect and insulting, particularly since I'd been maintaining my independence and successfully managing all aspects of apartment living without any assistance or difficulty. But more concerning had been the implication that my son and daughter-in-law were being encouraged to view my minor, normal aging-related changes as evidence that I needed housing intervention rather than simple accommodations or assistance when requested. After Robert and Patricia Williams had returned to Tucson following their extended Thanksgiving visit, David and Karen's attitude toward our living arrangement had shifted dramatically and had begun to include regular suggestions about practical solutions that would serve everyone's needs better while making room for family members who really need support and assistance. "Mom, we've been thinking about Karen's parents' situation," David had said during a family dinner in early December 2023. "They're really struggling with housing costs in Tucson, and they don't have the kind of retirement security that you've been able to build. We think it might make sense for them to move to Phoenix, where family could provide support." The presentation of his in-laws' financial difficulties as a family responsibility that should be addressed through modifications to my living situation had been the first direct indication that David and Karen had developed a plan that involved displacing me from my apartment to accommodate her parents' housing needs and financial limitations. "They've been paying $1,800 per month for a tiny apartment in Tucson with no amenities and no community," Karen had added, providing financial details that had clearly been shared to build a case for why my housing situation should be restructured to solve her parents' problems. They could really benefit from the kind of urban lifestyle and community resources that this building provides. The assumption that I should give up my carefully constructed retirement lifestyle to solve her parents' housing problems had been shocking enough. But what had followed had been a systematic campaign of pressure and manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for maintaining my independence while other family members experienced financial difficulties. "We know you've been talking about simplifying your lifestyle," David had continued, introducing themes that I'd never discussed and making assumptions about my preferences that had no basis in our previous conversations. "Maybe this would be a good opportunity for you to explore some of the senior living communities that would provide more services and social activities specifically designed for people your age." The suggestion that I had been considering senior living arrangements had been completely fabricated, as I'd never expressed any dissatisfaction with my current living situation or interest in institutional housing alternatives. But David's confident presentation of this false narrative had suggested that he and Karen had been developing arguments and justifications for displacing me regardless of my actual preferences or stated intentions. Over the following month, their pressure had intensified and had become more sophisticated, involving what had appeared to be carefully researched arguments about the benefits of senior living communities and the challenges of aging in place in urban environments that weren't specifically designed to serve elderly residents' changing needs. "Mom, we've been doing research about aging in place, and there are some real safety concerns about seniors living alone in downtown environments," Karen had said during a January 2024 family gathering, producing printed materials that she'd apparently collected from senior living facilities and elder care consulting services. The traffic, the noise, the lack of on-site medical support. These urban apartments really aren't designed for the needs of people in their 70s. The suggestion that my downtown Phoenix apartment was somehow dangerous or inappropriate for someone my age had been particularly absurd, given that the building had been specifically designed and marketed to appeal to active seniors who wanted urban lifestyle amenities combined with accessibility, features, and community support systems that made aging in place both feasible and enjoyable. But Karen had been prepared with what had appeared to be professionally researched arguments about the superiority of age-restricted communities and the services they provided that supposedly weren't available in conventional residential settings. "We've toured some really impressive senior communities that offer everything from fitness programs specifically designed for seniors to transportation services, meal plans, housekeeping, and on-site healthcare coordination," Karen had continued, presenting brochures and pricing information that she'd obviously been collecting in advance of this conversation. "These places really take the burden of home management off seniors so they can focus on enjoying their retirement." The assumption that managing my apartment had become burdensome rather than continuing to provide satisfaction and independence had been insulting and had demonstrated Karen's complete misunderstanding of my preferences, capabilities, and the lifestyle choices that had made my retirement successful and fulfilling. But the most shocking development had occurred in early February 2024, when David and Karen had announced that they'd already made preliminary arrangements for Robert and Patricia Williams to relocate to Phoenix, and that they expected me to cooperate with housing arrangements that would accommodate this family transition. "Mom, we need to talk about timeline and logistics," David had announced during what I'd thought would be a routine family dinner on February 10th. "Bob and Pat have given notice on their Tucson apartment, and they'll be moving to Phoenix at the end of March. We need to finalize the arrangements here so everything can transition smoothly." The revelation that concrete steps had been taken to relocate Karen's parents to Phoenix, without consulting me about the impact on my living situation, had been the first clear evidence that David and Karen had been planning this displacement for months while maintaining the pretense of casual family discussions about hypothetical future arrangements. "We've already started looking at senior living options for you," Karen had added, producing a folder of materials that she'd apparently prepared in advance of this announcement. "There are some really nice places with immediate availability, and we think the transition would be much easier if we handle it all at once, rather than drawing it out over multiple moves." The assumption that I would simply comply with their predetermined timeline and housing arrangements had been both shocking and infuriating, particularly given that they'd apparently been making irreversible commitments on behalf of other family members without my knowledge or consent. "We know this is a big change," David had continued, using the kind of patronizing tone typically reserved for elderly relatives whose decision-making capacity was considered impaired. "But we really think this arrangement will be better for everyone. You'll have professional support and social activities designed for your age group, and we'll be able to help Bob and Pat get established in Phoenix while they're dealing with health issues and financial stress." The implication that my cooperation with their plans was both inevitable and in my best interest had been the final confirmation that David and Karen viewed me not as an autonomous adult making my own housing decisions, but as an elderly family member whose preferences were secondary to their convenience and their determination to solve other people's problems using my resources and living space. My response had been immediate and unequivocal. I'd told them that I had no intention of leaving my apartment, that I was completely satisfied with my current living arrangements, that I was fully capable of managing my own housing decisions, and that their interference in my personal living situation was both inappropriate and unwelcome. "I appreciate your concern for Robert and Patricia's housing situation," I'd said, trying to maintain some semblance of family civility while making my position absolutely clear. "But I'm not interested in moving to a senior community, and I expect you to respect my decision to continue living in my own home for as long as I choose to do so." But David's response had revealed that he and Karen had been prepared for my resistance and had developed strategies for overcoming my opposition that went far beyond family persuasion. "Mom, we understand this feels overwhelming," David had said, "but we have responsibilities as your family to make sure you're safe and making good decisions. If you're not willing to consider these changes voluntarily, we may need to explore other options for ensuring your welfare and protecting your financial security." The threat of involuntary intervention to override my housing decisions had been the final confirmation that David and Karen viewed our family relationship not as one between equal adults, but as one in which they had authority to make decisions about my life regardless of my preferences or legal rights. "We've already consulted with elder care specialists about the best approaches for helping seniors who are resistant to necessary lifestyle changes," Karen had added, making clear that they'd been researching strategies for overcoming my autonomy without my knowledge or consent. "There are established procedures for family intervention when seniors are making decisions that put them at risk or prevent them from receiving appropriate care." The implication that I was mentally incompetent or unable to make appropriate decisions about my own housing had been both shocking and infuriating, particularly given my continued professional activity, my successful management of complex financial and property affairs, and my obvious competence in all areas of daily living. That evening, after David and Karen had left, I'd made the decision that would change everything forever and would demonstrate exactly what happened when people underestimated someone with my property management expertise, professional relationships, and determination to protect my rights and independence against family members who had mistaken generosity for weakness and assumed that age meant vulnerability. Rather than accepting their ultimatum or engaging in further family negotiations that they clearly viewed as formalities, before implementing their predetermined plans, I would use my 35 years of real estate expertise to demonstrate that some people fight back with property acquisition strategies that permanently reshape family dynamics and housing arrangements in ways that create consequences lasting for generations. My first step had been to contact Marcus Chen, my longtime real estate attorney and property acquisition specialist, to discuss the legal options available for protecting my housing rights and potentially gaining control over the property where I'd been living for 8 years, while building the kind of tenant protections and family boundaries that would prevent future manipulation. "Eleanor, what David and Karen are describing sounds like preparation for an elder abuse intervention," Marcus had confirmed during our emergency consultation the following morning. "If they're consulting with elder care specialists and building a record of family concern about your capacity. They're likely planning legal action that could give them authority over your housing and financial decisions regardless of your preferences. Marcus's legal analysis had confirmed my worst fears about David and Karen's intentions, while also providing clarity about the options available for protecting myself against their planned intervention, while simultaneously demonstrating the consequences of their betrayal and manipulation. The good news is that you have significant advantages in this situation, Marcus had continued. Your continued professional activity demonstrates ongoing competence. Your successful management of property and financial affairs proves your capacity, and your tenant rights provide legal protections that would be very difficult for them to override. But Marcus had also warned me about the potential effectiveness of family intervention proceedings, particularly when adult children were willing to present coordinated testimony about an elderly parent's declining capacity and need for protective supervision. Even competent seniors can lose autonomy through family intervention proceedings if relatives present compelling evidence of risk or impaired judgment, Marcus had explained. Courts often err on the side of caution when families express concern about elderly relatives, and the legal standard focuses on preventing harm rather than preserving independence. The sobering reality that I could potentially lose control of my housing and financial affairs, despite my obvious competence, had motivated me to develop a comprehensive strategy that would permanently protect my rights while demonstrating to David and Karen the consequences of underestimating someone with my expertise and determination. My strategic response had been based on my understanding that the best defense against their planned intervention would be to eliminate their ability to control my housing situation, while simultaneously creating new legal and financial arrangements that would ensure my continued independence and demonstrate the cost of their betrayal. Over the following 2 weeks, I'd worked with Marcus and a team of real estate acquisition specialists to develop a comprehensive property acquisition and management strategy that would accomplish several objectives: protect my housing rights against family challenges, ensure my continued autonomy over personal and living decisions, create immediate consequences for David and Karen's manipulation, and establish new ownership and control structures that would reflect my revised understanding of family relationships and loyalties. The centerpiece of my strategy had been the acquisition of the Roosevelt Row apartment building itself, a complex transaction that would remove me from tenant status while ensuring my continued residence and creating landlord authority over David and Karen's housing arrangements that would demonstrate the permanent consequences of their betrayal. This acquisition strategy will accomplish everything you want to achieve, Marcus had explained as we'd finalized the purchase arrangements. You'll gain complete control over your housing situation. David and Karen will lose their below-market rental arrangement, and the ownership structure will make it legally impossible for anyone to challenge your housing decisions or force changes to your living arrangements. The property acquisition had been funded through a combination of my real estate investment portfolio, retirement savings, and a commercial mortgage that had leveraged my excellent credit rating and property management expertise to secure favorable financing terms. The total purchase price of $12.8 million had represented a significant investment, but my financial analysis had demonstrated that the property would provide both housing security and investment returns that would enhance my retirement financial planning. But the acquisition had been only the first element of my comprehensive response to David and Karen's betrayal. I'd also implemented new lease and management arrangements that had removed them from any housing benefits, while ensuring they understood the full scope of their miscalculation about my capabilities and resources. The new lease structure had established market-rate rental terms for all building tenants, eliminating the $2,000 per month subsidy that David and Karen had been receiving while ensuring that my own housing costs were covered by rental income from other units. The lease had also included standard tenant screening requirements and references that David and Karen would need to meet if they wanted to continue residing in the building. I want them to understand that housing benefits are earned through respect and gratitude, not assumed through manipulation and entitlement, I'd told Marcus as we'd drafted the new lease documents. They made a choice to treat my generosity as weakness and my age as vulnerability. Now they'll learn that some people fight back in ways that permanently change family relationships and housing arrangements. The legal implementation of these changes had been completed by late February 2024, creating a new ownership and management structure that had eliminated David and Karen's housing security while ensuring my continued control and independence. Regardless of any future family challenges or legal actions they might attempt. But my response had included one additional element designed to demonstrate the full extent of my resources and determination while teaching David and Karen a lesson about the consequences of underestimating someone with my expertise and access to property acquisition resources. On March 1, 2024, I'd arranged for David and Karen to receive formal legal notification of the ownership change, lease termination, and new rental terms, delivered by property management representatives in a manner that would ensure they understood both the permanence of my decisions and the futility of any challenges they might be considering. The notification had included copies of the property, purchase documents, the new management agreement showing Eleanor Martinez as owner and operator, documentation of their housing subsidy that had been terminated, and a detailed explanation of the market rate lease terms they would need to meet if they wanted to continue residing in the building under standard tenant arrangements. This should make very clear that their plan to control your housing has not only failed, but has permanently altered their own housing security and family relationships, Marcus had explained as we'd prepared the notification documents. The breaking point that had triggered my final demonstration of consequences had occurred on March 15, 2024, when David and Karen had made their ultimate mistake by attempting to physically prevent my access to my own apartment while trying to force my relocation to the senior living facility they'd selected without my consent. I'd returned from a property management conference in San Diego to discover that David and Karen had changed the locks on my apartment, had moved Robert and Patricia Williams into my living space, and had arranged for my personal belongings to be packed and placed in storage, while claiming that they'd acted under emergency circumstances to protect my safety and welfare. "Eleanor, we were worried when you didn't return our calls while you were traveling," Karen had said when I'd confronted them about the unauthorized occupation of my apartment and the violation of my tenant rights. "We decided it was time to implement the transition plan we'd discussed, and we've arranged for your move to Sunset Manor Senior Living this week." The assumption that they had authority to change my locks, relocate my belongings, and force my placement in institutional housing against my will had been the final demonstration of their complete misunderstanding of both my legal rights and my capacity to protect myself against their manipulation. My response had been immediate and comprehensive. I'd contacted building security to report the unauthorized occupation of my property, had initiated legal proceedings for trespassing and elder abuse, and had implemented the final provisions of my ownership strategy that would permanently resolve the conflict while demonstrating the consequences of their assumptions about my vulnerability. "Ma'am, we need to see documentation proving your legal standing regarding this property," the building security supervisor had said when he'd arrived to investigate my complaint about the unauthorized occupation of my apartment. My response had been to produce the property ownership documents, the management agreement showing my authority over all building operations, and the lease violation notice that had terminated David and Karen's tenancy due to unauthorized occupancy and property damage. "The individuals currently in the apartment are my son and daughter-in-law along with her parents," I'd explained to the security supervisor. "They've changed the locks and moved my belongings without permission, and they're claiming authority over my property that they do not legally possess. I'm the building owner, and I'm requesting immediate removal of all unauthorized occupants." The security supervisor's review of the legal documents had confirmed that David and Karen had no ownership rights or legal standing to occupy the property, and that their actions constituted trespassing regardless of their family relationship to me or their claims about my welfare. "Sir, ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and vacate this property immediately," the security supervisor had informed David, Karen, and her parents. "You have no legal right to be here, and your continued occupation constitutes criminal trespass You have 24 hours to remove your belongings, and any future unauthorized entry will result in arrest and prosecution. The shock on David and Karen's faces when they'd realized that their carefully planned strategy had not only failed, but had resulted in their own eviction from property they'd assumed they could control, had been the first indication that they were beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation about my capabilities and resources. "Mom, you can't do this to family," David had said as they'd been forced to pack their belongings under security supervision. "We were only trying to help you make better decisions about your safety and housing security." My response had been to hand them copies of the legal documents that had permanently removed them from any housing benefits or family financial support, along with documentation of their unauthorized manipulation and their attempts to have me declared incompetent, without legal grounds. "You weren't trying to help me," I'd replied. "You were trying to steal my home and control my life based on assumptions about my age and vulnerability. You've learned that some people fight back with property acquisition strategies that permanently change family relationships and housing arrangements." The final resolution had come 6 weeks later, when David and Karen's attorney had contacted Marcus to inquire about the possibility of reaching a settlement that would restore their housing arrangements in exchange for their agreement to respect my autonomy and abandon any future challenges to my competence or property ownership. "Ms. Martinez has made her position very clear," Marcus had responded to their settlement inquiry. "The property ownership and management arrangements are permanent, and there are no circumstances under which she would consider restoring housing benefits to family members who attempted to have her declared incompetent and steal her home." The attorney's response had included threats of litigation, challenging the property acquisition and elder abuse claims, but Marcus's legal analysis had made clear that such challenges would be both unsuccessful and potentially subject to sanctions for frivolous litigation against clearly valid property transactions and ownership arrangements. Any litigation challenging these arrangements would be frivolous and would likely result in court sanctions against the plaintiffs and their attorney, Marcus had warned. "Ms. Martinez's competence is obvious. The property acquisition is perfectly legal, and the family's own actions in changing locks and attempting forced relocation would actually support elder abuse claims rather than provide grounds for challenging her property ownership." The final vindication had come 8 months later, when Phoenix Magazine had featured my property acquisition and management strategy in an article about innovative approaches to aging in place and elder rights protection, highlighting how my real estate expertise had successfully protected an elderly woman's autonomy against family manipulation while creating a model for senior housing security. "Eleanor Martinez has created a new paradigm for elder housing protection," the article had noted. "Her innovative use of property acquisition demonstrates how real estate expertise can protect elderly people's independence while creating permanent consequences for family members who attempt exploitation based on assumptions about age and vulnerability." The article had been accompanied by photographs of the Roosevelt Row building, now permanently protected under my ownership, and interviews with legal experts who had praised the sophisticated approach to combining housing security with elder rights advocacy while building wealth through strategic real estate investment. Standing in my magnificent home office 18 months after the resolution of the conflict, overlooking the Phoenix skyline that would remain mine for life while generating rental income that had enhanced my retirement security, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the complete vindication of my right to live according to my own values and priorities, while demonstrating that some people fight back with consequences that last for generations. The Roosevelt Row building had become more than just my home. It had become a symbol of what was possible when experience met determination and sophisticated property management expertise. The ownership structure had inspired other seniors throughout Phoenix to pursue similar housing security strategies, and my story had changed community attitudes about aging, autonomy, and the importance of protecting elderly people's rights against family members who mistake generosity for weakness. But perhaps most importantly, the property acquisition had taught David and Karen a lesson about respect, consequences, and the dangers of underestimating someone based on age-related assumptions that had nothing to do with actual capabilities or financial resources. Eleanor, your property acquisition strategy has become a model for elder housing protection throughout Arizona, Marcus had said during our most recent property management review. You've demonstrated that family manipulation can have permanent consequences and that some people have the knowledge and resources to protect themselves completely against exploitation and housing insecurity. The final irony had come 6 months ago, when David and Karen had been forced to relocate to a significantly more expensive apartment complex in suburban Phoenix due to their inability to afford downtown rental rates without the subsidy they'd been receiving from me. Their assumption that they could manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman had instead cost them thousands of dollars in increased housing costs, while permanently eliminating their access to the urban lifestyle and family financial support they'd been taking for granted. If someone in your life is trying to control your housing decisions while treating you as incompetent based on assumptions about age or vulnerability, remember my story. Remember that family relationships don't give anyone authority over your property or personal decisions, and that some people have the real estate knowledge and financial resources necessary to protect themselves completely against manipulation and housing insecurity. Remember that generosity and trust are not the same as weakness or vulnerability, and that people who mistake kindness for opportunity might discover they've challenged someone with the expertise and determination to become their landlord while creating permanent consequences for betrayal and manipulation. What's your story? Have you ever had to protect yourself against family members who assumed they could control your housing or exploit your trust? Share it in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories about turning family betrayal into complete housing vindication and proving that some people fight back with property acquisition strategies that permanently reshape family dynamics and living arrangements. Because sometimes the best response to people who try to kick you out of your own home is showing them exactly what happens when they underestimate someone with 35 years of property management expertise and unlimited determination to protect what they've worked their entire life to build and maintain. David and Karen thought they could manipulate me into giving up my home and independence. What they actually did was inspire the most comprehensive property acquisition of my career while learning that some 70-year-old women fight back with real estate strategies more sophisticated and more permanent than anything they could ever imagine. Sometimes the people who think your best days are behind you are about to discover you're actually someone with the property management knowledge and financial resources necessary to become their landlord while teaching them that respect and autonomy aren't negotiable at any age. That's a lesson worth $12.8 million in property value, and every dollar was worth it to prove that family betrayal has permanent consequences and that some dreams of manipulation are too dangerous to pursue against someone with my expertise. Resources and unlimited determination to prove everyone wrong. Housing secured, independence protected, family manipulation answered with property ownership, respect earned through consequences. The view from 71 is spectacular when you're collecting rent from the people who tried to make you homeless. David and Karen learned that underestimating their mother was the beginning of the most expensive housing lesson they'd ever receive, and the most comprehensive demonstration of what happens when you challenge someone with 35 years of real estate expertise and unlimited determination to protect their rights. Respect your elders, especially when they have the property management knowledge to become your landlord, and teach you that some assumptions about aging are too costly to make. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.